Hello and welcome back. I'm back again today with Kevin from the Codemagic team, and we're gonna try to solve the second challenge that I brought for Kevin. Before we go into the second challenge and before I tell you what it is about, Kevin, can you remind us what we did in the last session that we recorded together?
Yeah, absolutely. So we went through how to build and publish an iOS application to App Store Connect and make it available via TestFlight. We then looked at how we should or how we could publish it to the web as well. So we published it to Codemagic static pages, and then we talked about how we could host it or publish it to the S3 S3 bucket as a static site. So yeah.
Yeah, but that's essentially both focused on the client-side application itself. Now, we all know that there is client-side applications that you guys might like to build, right? But it's a very uncommon thing that you do not have a backend API that you need to talk to. And there's hundreds of solutions on how to build backend APIs. And if you're watching this channel regularly, you know that I do that, especially with hosting stuff on AWS as well. But I've never really brought things together in terms of how do we do that in for a mobile application, and how do we do it for the web application at the end. Now, that's the second challenge that I wanted to solve with Kevin. How can we use Codemagic to deploy both the front end of an application and the back end of an application? And that's what we want to try to solve today. Kevin, are you up for that?
Yeah, let's go. Sounds good.
So how do we start? Do we start looking at the front end CI/CD pipeline, or do we start looking at how do we deploy the backend? And how would you do that with Codemagic?
Yeah, so I've set up an example of a backend. So let's take a look at that. I'll just share my screen and then we can talk through it and come up with some ideas. We'll just refresh the view and then we can get started. Okay, so when I spoke with Johannes about doing this section, I kind of reminded him that our main focus is on the front end, but I was up for the challenge of seeing what we can do with deploying the back end. So I contrived an example that we could look at and discuss and see how it works. And I think it's pretty doable. So I created a simple Python API with the intention of publishing it after running some tests. So just some simple unit tests. And based on whether those unit tests pass or fail would depend on publishing the API to the hosting service, essentially. So I'm not a
So
Python developer, but
me
I
neither.
came up with an example. So I used the magic of AI to create a nice little example, and I'll show you that in a moment. You had a question, Johannes?
No, I was just gonna say you put up a challenge for me as well, because I don't like Python and I don't use Python a lot. I'm more a TypeScript guy. But let's see how far we get then, Kevin.
Yeah, so let's have a look. Now, this is going to be slightly different than the last section. So if you remember last time we spoke, we were using the workflow editor, which is the graphical user interface for
Yep.
configuring workflows. Now, because this isn't a Flutter application, we need to go straight into the YAML configuration. So let's go in there. So as you see, a lot different than checkboxes, drop downs, and what have you. This is a pure YAML configuration and something that you can check into your source code repository and version control it. Now, probably the best thing to do is just give a quick introduction of what this stuff is. So it's not very long, which is good. It's very simple. So, and then we can look at the Python app and see what that does. But essentially, when we're configuring a workflow with Codemagic YAML, we have a section which is called workflows. You can have one or more workflows. You remember last time when we did the front end, we had the iOS workflow and then we had the web workflow. So essentially, that's two workflows. You could do the same thing within the YAML file. But essentially, we have a configuration section where we can set up versions, we can define variables, we can import groups of variables from the UI. We have things like our triggering, where we can initiate a build on a push event to the source code repository. And then we have the scripts that we want to run. Now, for this particular one, we've got some simple scripts, which are to install some dependencies for the Python API. and then a command that runs some unit tests that have been defined in my code.
Okay.
And then the other thing that we do is we run a script here to deploy this code to a service called render. Now, to do that, I got a deploy key, and it just requires a simple curl command here, as you can see, where I pass the deploy key, and I only run that at the moment when I have a condition met. So I've got a Boolean condition set at the top here to say whether I wanted to deploy this to hosting. So let's open the API example just so you know what I'm working with. So let me just see if I can find it. Should be in my recent Python unit. So here we've got the YAML file again.
Okay.
So that's literally just bring it in from the repository, just making sure I'm on the right branch. So we're talking about the same thing. What have we got? So we've got an app here with some routes in it. So basically, on the default route, it's just going to return a message saying, hello, Python API. Obviously, I've done some testing recently and said update it again. So that's about the limit of my Python skills, is changing some simple text strings. But then we've got some other routes here that allow us to add numbers together and add lists of numbers. Pretty simple stuff. Now, what we also have is a set of tests here. So this is going to just come through and run. Let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different tests, and I think they're pretty self-explanatory. They're adding things like invalid inputs, making sure we can add lists of numbers, and testing invalid inputs again, making sure that the result is coming to, I think here, 15 is going to be the result. So that's all it does. Now, let's have a look at running this and seeing what it actually does. So if I can just minimize that. So make sure I didn't set up another branch. I do have another branch for some reason. I'm just trying to remember why. So let me just, I think the biggest difference here you can see is we set Xcode. Now you might be thinking, Kevin, this is a Python API. Why on earth are you using Xcode as a value here? The Xcode version, when you're running on a Mac OS machine, determines which image we use. So this will run the 15.4 image. If I put 16.1, then it's going to run a newer image with better things on it. So this one's got 16.1.
Okay. So that essentially defines which is the image that it's going to use for the build instance that we are going to use. And essentially, well, this is a Mac OS, as we saw, right? Which essentially means that if in this case, Python comes pre-installed on it. But if I now want to interact with other runtimes or stuff like that, I would potentially need to install that as part of my script.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay. Right. Can we do a change here?
What would you like to change?
Can we try to find out whether the AWS CLI is installed on this one?
That's a good question. So the best way to find out is to go to here, then click on the docs. We'll just maximize that. And then if you want to know what's installed on a specific machine, so I'll just go with 16.1, I think I had.
Okay, yep.
And then we should have a look.
Oh, cool.
We've got AWS 2.18.1. So
that's cool.
Yes, that means it's pre-installed. Lots of other goodies there as well. Lots of other goodies as well. So
do we have TypeScript?
Python
Node is there. Yeah, Node is there. Cool.
Node's there, NPM's there. I use JQ a lot to parse JSON responses. Yeah,
cool. So this is great. Yeah, this is great. Thanks. That answered the question, because essentially that means regardless which hosting service I use, I could also just use existing CLI tools, or I could potentially also install my own CLI tools that I want to get into the build image.
Yeah. And you'll see here, if you want to find out information about like Linux. So Linux might be a better choice to run your Python backend builds on. So you could, see here, we've still got the AWS tools and everything else that you require. I'm not going
But
to change the instance type
well,
right at this moment,
so
but
so a lot of people, especially in the backend building world, have been trying to tell us to use ARM64 based deployments at the end, especially if you look at Lambda and stuff like that, right? So if you're not hosting a provider like Render, then you actually need a Mac OS build in this case, I think, because you
okay.
don't have ARM64 builds available. Okay, so this is great. That means we on the right hand side up there, you can click return to app. Then you should be there.
Oh, okay. I was blind to it, so
That's
yeah.
okay, cool. So this is how we deploy it. So let's
So
see. Let's let
let's
it
just
run.
yeah, just one other thing which is important. So you'll see here we didn't have this available in Workflow Editor. This is importing a group of environment variables. So
Okay.
you can define environment variables either at the application level or the team level. So I think I did this
Okay.
at team, and it won't be here. So no, we'll go to the team,
Okay.
and then we'll go to my team that I'm currently using. We'll look at global variables and secrets, and you'll see here that I've got render deploy, and this is my deploy key, and I've created a group called render, and this is the value that I'm referencing in the YAML file. So this says
Okay.
bring in,
Makes
and I
sense.
can have one or many. It doesn't matter. So let's go back, and then back again. Right, and we're going to choose start new build. Now you can see here I've
That's the Boolean,
defined
yeah.
I've got a build input. So this is something we introduced only a couple of months ago. So you can actually have things like text import. You can have these booleans, numbers to control your workflow. And we had a condition set on the YAML here, which is called a when condition. So it's saying when this input is checked, so it's true, run this script. So I'm going to go wild, and I'm going to enable this, and then we're going to go and see if that gets deployed. So it started up, and then we'll check the logs as it goes along and see what it's doing. I'll just remind myself also of the place where it's hosted. So I'm in no way affiliated with Render. I just picked a service at random that I saw was able to host a Python API for me. So it's done the process. So you can see, if you want to look at the command, we told it to create a virtual environment. We told it to install any of the requirements. So in Python, there's a requirements text. This is similar to your package.json, I guess, in a Node app, telling it what your dependencies are. So we're telling it to install the dependencies. And then we told it to run the unit tests that we found in the test app.py file with the verbose logging, which is the -v. So if I hide the command, we can see it downloaded Flask. It then ran tests, and we can see here that the test add invalid input is okay, this one's okay, this one's okay, this one's okay. One thing I didn't have a chance to investigate is how we can format the output better for such applications. Now, why am I mentioning that? So if we were talking about a iOS app, whether that's Swift, Flutter, anything iOS, when you're doing unit tests, we will parse the output and
Okay.
present it in the log file for you in a really nice, clear format. So if we look at here, you can see that the tests here have been parsed.
Yeah,
You
okay.
can expand it, and then you can look at the logs as well. If you just go to log, and then you can see a more detailed report about the test summary. So
Yeah,
maybe it's possible with the Python backend as well. So I'll
and I
investigate
think
that.
that comes from the fact that, well, you're not optimized for doing this, right? You have the possibility, but we are kind of not. So we're using a niche product to do something that is not niche,
Yes, yes.
and that's okay, right? It's not. Let's not. Let's not make this bad, right?
Yeah, okay, that's cool. And then yeah, so it did the curl command using my key, and it uploaded it. And then we this publishing is basically a step that we always run. So this is normally where we gather artifacts. So this is
Yes.
part of
Yes.
Codemagic. And then somewhere, if we can find it, render, it should have. Okay, let's remember how I logged in. Hopefully I chose a logical option and I used GitHub. I did. And
Hey,
here's my API, and it reckons that we've deployed it. So let's click on here, and it's a timestamp match. Yeah,
yep,
10:24. We're currently
it
10:25,
it
so this is
it
true.
matches.
And then we should be able to see at this URL, hello Python API updated again. So
Hello, cool. Hey, well, that was
that's it.
easier than expected, to be honest.
I found it easier than I thought it was going to be as well. So when you first sort of discussed this, I was like, we don't really do that, but it's
Well,
surprisingly easy, and I was really happy. So,
yeah, and with all of the pre-installed tools that you have on the image, you also give a lot of other options. Now, there's one thing that you haven't really answered yet. So if we can go back to your Visual Studio Code for a second,
yeah, let's go back there.
you kind of cheated on me a bit
Oh, tell me.
because you you have the backend only in this repo. And I was kind of thinking of, shouldn't we have a monorepo where we have both backend and front end, and then doing a push would then deploy both front end and backend. I think based on what I saw, that would also be possible with Codemagic, right? So um, let me try to explain what I understood. I would now move all of the Python stuff into a subfolder. I would then create a new front end subfolder where I would have all of the front end stuff. And then in the YAML file for the Codemagic workflow, I could define a workflow that is triggered on backend check-ins and a workflow that is triggered on front-end check-ins, and that would automatically run. And I could have a release workflow that would run for both builds at the end somehow.
That's right. And I would consolidate everything into a YAML configuration if you're going to do that. So you would put your front end Flutter app perhaps here, and then put the, as you say, in separate folders. So we've got a monorepo, and then tell the Codemagic YAML where your app is and when to trigger the workflow. So there is pretty good
Can
documentation
yeah.
on monorepos and how to reference where the files are located when we're working with a monorepo as well.
Okay. Can I reuse steps or concatenate workflows then in this case? So let's say I have now my front end workflow, I have my back end workflow, and now I would have one workflow that does both things. Is there a chance to bring them together somehow in an automated fashion? Or do I need to copy paste the workflow again into a general one?
Do you mean reusability
Yes.
or?
Yes. I mean,
Yeah, so
usability.
yeah, so what we would normally use is something called YAML anchors and aliases, and that basically allows you to set a. I won't try and do one from scratch, but just as a basic thing, you would create a definitions section up here, and then you can start adding in scripts that are reused, and then you can reference them. If we go to the docs, that's probably the easiest way. Let's get back to the Codemagic site somehow. I'm probably in a new tab. So let's get rid of that and go back to Codemagic. And then we go to the docs. And then we'll go to the YAML up here, a little slider there. And then we'll go into here. I probably could search for anchors and aliases. There we go. Right, here. You can avoid repetition by using anchors. So let's have a look at what this tells us about. It didn't take me exactly to the part I was hoping for, but there we
That's
go.
okay.
So you can see here, reusing sections. We've got this ampersand and the asterisk. So this is where we're defining something we're going to reuse or use across multiple workflows. And then when we want to use it, we will then use the asterisk and then call. So
Okay.
here we've got this increment build number. So for example, we could take that,
And just
add it,
reuse that then at the end.
obviously make sure that the indentation is super correct, because if it isn't, it's not going to work. So you've got to be super careful. And then when you go into your script section, we have the syntax was to use an asterisk, and then copy that name.
Well, that's the usual Anchor YAML stuff, right? That we
Yep,
could use. Okay.
that's right. So, and that will run that script up there. So if you've got scripts that are common between workflows, define them once and then reference them like that in the YAML configuration.
Cool. Amazing. And
Brilliant.
obviously, with the current approach, we could also follow the way of integrating another build afterwards, right? By calling the oh, come on, by calling the API to trigger a new
Absolutely.
webhook, right? That's the stuff that I tried out when I started my Codemagic career 2 years ago.
Yeah. So, for example, if you wanted to leave your front end in the GUI, you would just use the script section to use the Codemagic API to call this YAML-based workflow. So you don't have to convert your previous one into YAML. So there's so many ways to do this. This is a really good option. Everybody gets an API key, so you just use your API key. Everybody can access it, and then you would just say, "I want to call this specific workflow. This is my app ID." Again, it's really well documented. And then let's say your build deploy is successful, or even your test is successful. Then you could set a condition, say if this has been successful, then call the API to start the build for the backend. So that's kind of a logical way of doing it.
Cool. Makes sense. Good.
Great.
Kevin, challenge solved.
Brilliant. That's what we like to hear.
Yeah, that's great. I think I'm happy, and I think I know what to do with making use of Codemagic for my mobile applications build that I want to do. So did we have anything else we wanted to cover? I think we're done, right? Essentially.
Yeah, I think we did everything. I'm really happy that we covered it all. So again, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out. You can get hold of me on LinkedIn. It's Kevin Shahoida. Twitter. Oh, X. Sorry, it's no longer called Twitter, is it? I forget. At Kev Suda. And then if you want to contact me by email, it's kevin@codemagic.io.
And you did not yet follow Kelsey Hightower going to Blue Sky?
No, not yet.
Okay, so it seems like he started a movement out of X. So I'm part of that movement as well. So you can find me also on Blue Sky. If you ever get there, Kevin, let me know, and I can add that handle to the show notes as well.
Okay.
And with that, I would say thank you so much for doing this with me, for recording this session, and for helping our listeners to build and deploy better web, mobile, and integrated applications. And if you have feedback on Codemagic, feel free to, if you don't want to speak to Kevin directly because you're a shy person, go to me and I can forward and help to also put that in context in some of the stuff that we've been doing. But other than that, the comments are open. Would love to see your feedback and hear what other stuff you're interested in from a CI/CD for mobile perspective, and would love to cover some more around that as well. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next videos coming up soon. Bye bye.